Greetings, this is Christian Alexander Richmond, and today I'm going to go over some of the controversy regarding fantasy and fact, separating fiction from creative licensing, and just stretching fictional interpretations of different topics, different subjects. So specifically, I've noticed some big titles like Neo, even some theatrical titles like The Last Samurai, among other things, being thrown in the discussion. So, in order, we'll cover Neo, Onimusha, Samurai Warriors 5, Dynasty Warriors 9, The Last Samurai, Shogun, and a bit of Assassin's Creed Shadows to sprinkle some of that in. Of course, I'll have bits and pieces of the game that fans are really excited for, really lamenting the coming of, or indifferent about the advent of this new AC title after 17 years of fans waiting for a Japanese Assassin's Creed game. So, Neo, where to start? Well, we have to discern, we have to differentiate the fact from the fiction. Now, how is this presented and represented in the actual game? Well, first off, we can see that there are guardian spirits. There are these kind of magical creatures, these fantastical elements, these demonic and devilish beings. And the character, the protagonist, that seems to manifest quite a bit of controversy, as Yasuke is in AC Shadows. Well, that protagonist is William Adams. He's known as William the Pilot or Miura Anjin. And I will go over more of his historical background when we cover Shogun at the end of the video. However, this is a real person. Now, as we can see from the presentation of the actual game, there's so many ahistorical elements. What do I mean by ahistorical? Well, there's quite a bit of demons being slain, being slew by all these different samurai, all these different ninja. There's even some onryoji. Maybe my pronunciation is a bit incorrect. However, we have very anime type, very fantastical types of action here. And one of the telling factors of this is the large extent of mythological elements involved in the game. Neo does not shy away from being a fictional representation of the Japanese historical period. As the game overview reads, ancient demons, feudal lands. So we can easily discern that this is more a fantastical game compared to a based on fact game. With that said, who knows? I mean, in AC Shadows, we have Yasuke, who is purportedly the first foreign samurai, the African samurai. If there were any African samurai, that of course would be Yasuke, because he would be the closest to it, as he is popularly depicted throughout many different titles in Japanese media, etc. His character usually is presented in that samurai-esque kind of way. However, just because there's certain types of representation, unfortunately, that does not define this as fact or this as fake, as fiction. As I've discussed in the previous video, and due to my background as a Japanese history teacher and samurai descendant, I'm a bit more attached to this topic at hand. So Yasuke, just quickly, maybe more of a kosho. We're not exactly sure. We don't have all the primary sources to 100% define or to deny how much of a kosho was he. Did he ascend into bushi? Because there takes about 2 years to a few decades from kosho to samurai. But that's a topic for another time at the end of the video. Another major aspect that really puts the icing on the cake as to why Neo is a fantastical kind of game is because Oda Nobunaga, spoiler alert, is revived, comes back, or whatever at the end of the game. I guess he's the main antagonistic boss at the end of Neo 1. I unfortunately have not finished the game. That is such an incredibly difficult game. So these kind of fantastical elements, they could really enhance the enjoyment of the experience playing an action game, making the action more over the top, more flashy, this and that, may be more preferred by the players. Of course, preferences, they're contingent on the person. However, Neo is not the first game to push the limits of historical fiction. Assassin's Creed Shadows is not that game either. There's a game that preceded both of these series, and that would be the 8 million plus Onimusha series. So Onimusha 1 in particular is a very easily identifiable historical fiction rooted in fantasy. Now, even though we have, for example, a Japanese studio, just like with Neo, making a Japanese kind of history game, we could clearly see by the presentation that this is not a historically accurate video game. This is not a historically accurate depiction of historical events, even though this is set in a historical time and place. Why do I say this? Well, in the game, again, if you don't care for spoilers, skip, Nobunaga is the Demon King. Even though in the intro, there's Okayazama in 1560, Oda wins, as is historically accurate. If you notice, at the end of the battle, an arrow pierces his throat, and he falls dead. Although he comes back, similar to like Neo. maybe. He comes back here, rises again as a type of demon figure, a demon king in Onimusha. Now, aside from that, we have magic, we have monsters known as Oni in Japanese. So, not so difficult to define, oh, this is a fantastical game. There is no attempt to try and root this in 100% factual or historical accuracy. So in the presentation of the website, there is no attempt to try and push that, okay, this part, this character, Oda Nobunaga, Kechi Samanosuke, who is Akechi Hidemitsu, these are real historical figures. They are. However, the presentation is ahistorical, not accurate. And is there anything wrong with that? No, because the presentation of the game, well, this is a game. People play games to find utility, to find enjoyment. Not everyone wants to go through a history lesson, because you can fall asleep, this and that. People go there to have fun more so than not. And maintaining and keeping that fun is something that a lot of fans keep on going back to. And that's why with all these different sequels across the many series that touch on the Japanese historical era of specifically the Warring States era, the Sengoku Jidai, we'll see titles, and this is another title that I've seen thrown around on social media in response to Assassin's Creed Shadows and Yasuke's inclusion, Samurai Warriors 5. Now the Samurai Warriors series also crossed about 8 million sold, like Onimusha has. Now Samurai Warriors 5 in particular, why have people brought this up? Because there is Yasuke. Yasuke's first introduction to the Samurai Warriors series was with 5. And fans might have been very excited by his inclusion because, oh wow, this can really change up or make the story interesting. We have a foreigner, someone who was actually there. However, just because a character is in the game, does that mean the character actually existed? Now, specifically regarding Toei Tecmo, Omega Force's representation and how they've handled the Warrior series, the Muso title, historically, they've added historically accurate characters, they've added real people, and then they've also added original creations. One of the primary examples being Mitsuki. And Mitsuki, she is defined, as is noticeable on the official website here, a ninja raised believing her father is Nobunaga. Was there any ninja raised believing that her father was Oda Nobunaga? No, that is 100% fallacious, that's inaccurate, that's fictional. This is nothing new in the Warriors series. There are many fictional elements, not only with characters, but with the historical liberties taken in fictional battles, how the characters are represented, the actions, the Muso attacks, these kind of magical, flashy attacks. Now that's totally fine, and these are done all to enhance the drama of the game and the story. Regarding specifically to Yasuke, he is described as someone who has mastered the Japanese language. This is, according to some of the primary sources, accurate. And if I recall correctly, there's even some data insinuating and suggesting that he would have conversations with Oda Nobunaga, and they would communicate here and there. Again, Yasuke was in Oda Nobunaga's service from, around February 1581 until Oda Nobunaga's death in 1582, 15 months later? So, that's not too far from reality, but the issue at hand is that Yasuke was employed as a samurai for the purpose of serving as a samurai. That would be unfortunately inaccurate. Again, as I've mentioned in my previous video, Yasuke is more of a kosho. And grays exist. Not everything is black and white, as I've mentioned before. And because of Yasuke's avoided notes, particularly after Honnoji, the sky is the limit. And the Assassin's Creed series usually creates characters that are fictional. So when there's a character whose life is so open-ended, there's a lot of fictional liberties that could be taken. However, the presentation, what is viewed, what is perceived to be historically accurate and not, these are all areas that are affecting people looking at the games today. But people have a different kind of reaction based on how games are perceived and how they are marketed. So far with Neo, Onimusha, and Samurai Warriors 5, the Samurai Warriors series in general, the perception of the series is this is not a historically accurate 100% across the board game. There are many fictional liberties taken. That's totally fine. People can easily understand that. So just because other Japanese companies represent a certain character a certain way and make games based on history of Japan, does not mean everything can be taken at face value, unfortunately or fortunately. And this is honestly relatively simple to identify and understand, that creative licenses and fallacious additions are taken. So for example, moving on to Dynasty Warriors 9. Why do I bring this title up? Assassin's Creed Shadows is not about Chinese history. That would be Assassin's Creed Jade. And Assassin's Creed Jade is not on the Three Kingdoms era either, but Dynasty Warriors 9 is. I bring this up because this is made from the same creator, Toei Tecmo Omega Force. Now, Dynasty Warriors 9 has a whole host of different characters, historical, and some that are a bit more rooted in fiction, especially with how they're presented in the story. So while in Dynasty Warriors 3, we've had two fictional characters like Fushi and Nuwa, these kind of mythological godly beings in Chinese history, in Dynasty Warriors 9, we have the two Qiao. So if we look at Xiao Qiao, for example, part of her bio reads, it is said that she joined her husband on the battlefield partially on a whim, For this reason, she often showed a rare sort of courage on the battlefield. Is that correct? Let's move on to her older sister, Datya. She learned how to fight after her strong desire to aid her husband overcame her aversion to battles. The two Chows, they're famed for their beauty historically, married by Sun Tzu and Zhou Yu. I'm butchering the pronunciation, unfortunately. I'm still learning Chinese. However, did these two Chows, did they fight on the battlefield? No. That is 100% an absurd kind of representation of the characters. However, is it absurd in the game? No, because there's many different kind of characters who never saw the battlefield that are featured in the game. And that reason is to deepen the various character developments, the story arc, and all these different types of dramas going on throughout the titles. So is anything wrong with this? Again, no. Sky's the limit. Fictional liberties, totally fine. They're not represented in a way to assert the Chows actually fought in battle. No. What are their weapons? They are some twin fans. Do people really fight with fans? Especially with no blades on? No, that's more of a fantastical kind of representation of events. Now, creative takes and pushing the bounds of historical fiction could intensify the potential entertainment and joy of the ride, as I've echoed again and again and again. But how far becomes too far? There are some people who are really, really upset at the inclusion of Assassin's Creed's Yasuke because this is an African samurai, as it were. Specifically because this is an African person in Japan during Japan's most famous period, the Warring States period. But what about the Meiji era? What about when Commodore Matthew Perry opened up Japan in 1853 onward? We have the relatively famous, we have the box office hit, The Last Samurai from 2003, featuring Tom Cruise. And I have noticed on social media this kind of disdain, this title being thrown around because this is a Caucasian samurai. Where was the outrage then? Yeah. So a bit of background. The Last Samurai was never marketed or advertised as a historically accurate film. Usually when there's a movie based on a true story, the trailer has based on a true story. The marketing involves some of that kind of narrative. However, no, that's not the case. The Last Samurai is not based on a true story in the way that we would understand, because America never ever sent military advisors as was shown in the film. There was never a Captain Nathan Algren who went and fought against the Imperial Army with the Japanese samurai. However, the real turn of events is The Last Samurai is somewhat inspired by historical events, although there's another kind of cosmetic face on it. Instead of American, that was French. Now, diving a little deeper into the history, the historical events in question would be the Boshin War from 1868 to 1869, and specifically the final samurai battle of Hakodate. However, in the movie, this is more akin to the historical Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 by Saigo Takamori. Now, Saigo Takamori's character is represented by Watanabe Ken's Matsumoto Mori, right? And Tom Cruise's character is based on the real-life French military advisor, Jules Brunet. Maybe I'm mispronouncing his name, apologies ahead. Now, Jules Brunet, similarly to Captain Nathan Algren, helped the Japanese army modernize, and he also fought with the Last Samurai, just as Tom Cruise's Captain Nathan Algren witnessed the Last Samurai fight, Watanabe Ken's Matsumoto Mori. So the presentation of the film was not pushing that, oh, Tom Cruise's Nathan Algren is a legendary samurai. He is a real person. No, that was never in the cards. Of course, how do I say? Whitewashing is definitely a blot on Western cinema. Unfortunately, we have had depictions of many historical figures, such as Jesus Christ or whatever other kind of characters, as whitewashing exists in quite a bit of older Western cinema. This promulgation is asinine and a bit silly. Now, any form of whatever washing that goes against the accurate depictions of historical figures, that would perpetuate ignorance, and that would promulgate a kind of silly representation, a kind of jarring experience looking at the media if the person understands the actual history. Now, maintaining and heeding care to historical accuracy is important to some, but maybe doesn't matter. All depends on what is the objective of the story. Is this to push a fictional story, or is this to push historical accuracy? It all matters on how the subject is represented. So we go from The Last Samurai, which is really pushing the bounds of historical accuracy, because this is just slightly influenced by that French story from 1868 to 1869. But instead, that's in an 1877, 1876 time period of the movie. Now go to the recent, very popular Shogun show by FX. Well, instead of representing the historical events loosely based on history, loosely influenced by history, we have the historical figure William Adams. As in Neo, however, in Shogun, that's not William Adams. That is John Blackthorne. Now, I will say that I have yet to watch the show. However, I'm 100% familiar with William Adams, the historical figure. As I've read his diary letters, I'm familiar with the primary sources regarding that person, as well as some of the people around him. So the show is essentially depicting the historical events just with different characters, different names. But visually, the gist is very, very similar. Maybe the events are a bit similar. Now, the show does nothing to really present that this is 100% history, because again, the characters are different. Tokugawa Ieyasu's character is not Tokugawa Ieyasu, just like Ishida Mitsunari's character is not called Ishida Mitsunari. So that kind of differentiation, that distinction there, paints a relatively easy picture for everyone to understand, hey, there's something different about this. Why? Now, diving into the pilot, William Adams, Miura Anjin. When William Adams was in Japan, he was taken to Osaka and later befriended Tokugawa Ieyasu. To some people's surprises, maybe, he became a trusted advisor, especially regarding maritime activities. However, William Adams is shown as a samurai, right? In some of the games, he's depicted as a samurai, just like in Neo. Funny thing about that is, in Neo, actually, in the very beginning, as we're seeing, the game starts in Europe. The game starts in England. So because of that, the game starting in England makes sense. William Adams is the character that's going to be featured in the game. Well, the game started in England. He went to Japan. So of course, an Englishman starting the game in England goes to Japan. That's going to make more sense because William Adams actually came from that area of the world and was in Japan. And he had experience with being a samurai. However, he was not this master swordsman initially, even though he had experience in the Royal Navy, if I recall correctly. Anyways, continuing on to the historical figure himself. This would be true to say that he did become a samurai. Tokugawa Ieyasu, as a result of William's acceptance to become that advisor, to really fuel the development of a greater maritime capability, among other things, Tokugawa Ieyasu bestowed him the honor of being able to ascend into samuraiship with the two swords. And he allowed William Adams to marry. And who did he marry? He married Oyuki. Even though he had a wife and children in his home in Europe, he married again since he was not allowed to return. Furthermore, he and Oyuki had a son, Joseph. The most compelling detail is not the samurai aspect, not the samurai element. The wildest part that I had learned when I was doing this research, and that many students are usually surprised to hear, is that he was made a hatamoto. That is a minor daimyo. He was made a minor daimyo of Hemi. And this was passed on to his son, Joseph. And this passage was respected by Tokugawa Ieyasu's son and successor, Tokugawa Hidetada. So this is documented. This is all legitimate. I'm not familiar whether or not Shogun goes over this. I do know that there will be, seasons 2 and 3? So maybe in those subsequent seasons, they will dive into Blackthorn's child and how he becomes a hatamoto, who knows. So Assassin's Creed Shadows, how far does that stray from reality, from fact? How much does that go into, how much does that delve into fiction? There were kunoichi, the female ninja. Of course, maybe some of their historical functions could be different. Nothing wrong with that. The depiction, though, of the African samurai of historical legend is Ubisoft, is the team portraying him as a historical legend, being an African samurai. The language would seem so. An intriguing element of what I've noticed on the website is, after completing his training to become a skilled samurai, what is so remarkable in this kind of description of him is this seems to indicate more historical authenticity. And if there's more historical authenticity here, that is very deceptive, and that's incredibly misleading, unfortunately, because as I've mentioned in my previous video, he does not have enough time. If we look at the general duration required to ascend into the samurai position. Now, of course, the fluidity and chaos of the time period may allow for some exceptions. However, if we think about the Bushido, the kind of samurai code, and the amount of training required, especially with Yasuke being more kosho, more involved with page responsibilities, household responsibilities, even though there's training for kosho as well, to ascend into samuraiship, potentially. That requires, again, 2 years, a couple decades. And with 15 months max of service to Oda Nobunaga, because the 15th month is when Oda Nobunaga was killed by Akechi Mitsuhide being forced to commit seppuku, time seems a bit limited, unfortunately. However, we will see, again, because the official website does not really do much in pushing what is historically accurate or not. I have not seen any of the other AC Shadows related videos by the team, by the developers. Who knows? I'm ignorant on that. However, just with this information so far, the trailer and the official website, the only historical element really being pushed is Yasuke. And is anything wrong with that? Well, if people misunderstand history, just like with any type of history, that may be unfortunate. However, this is a video game, and doing fictional takes on somebody who may have had some experience in the samurai realm and who is commonly depicted as a samurai, especially in Japanese popular media, the fault may not be so much in showing him that way, because that has been the popular representation. And while there are people who for 17 years have been clamoring to finally play as a famed Japanese samurai who is of Japanese ethnicity, or to just play as any kind of original Japanese character, to blend in more with Japan instead of, as I've heard, stand out due to being so visually different. I guess that's why there's Naoe, the female ninja, the kunoichi type. Only time will tell whether or not this game is amazing and they've created a wonderful and compelling narrative, a really jaw-dropping experience. Who knows whether this will be another AC2 trilogy type experience or not. Anyways, how was that? Please let me know if this just made everything more convoluted, more confusing. If you agree or disagree with some of my points, I'm always available to have a discussion. So leave a comment below. Let me know your opinions, your thoughts, what you think about the differences between fantasy and reality. Is AC Shadows doing a good job? Have these other titles piqued your interest? Were you familiar with any of this information? Let me know. You have a wonderful day and be safe.